Alright folks, today I am once again taking a look at some of the smaller factions that were left behind in the Walking Dead universe and exploring some of the unique ways they approach the apocalypse. Not every group in the franchise shaped the world as we know it now, but each left a mark on the survivors they encountered. And though many were wiped out, overshadowed, or quietly dropped from the narrative, each of them offered a unique answer to the same question: how do you survive the end of the world? So today, I wanted to explore the philosophies of 3 more smaller factions we've seen in this world, their impact on the story overall, and the reasons that led to their failures, successes, or disappearances. But with that said, if you end up enjoying this video, I'd greatly appreciate it if you hit that like button and drop a sub to see more content like this. First appearing all the way back in Season 1 of the main show, the Vatos were initially introduced as a hostile group taking shelter within the charred ruins of Atlanta. Their leader, Guillermo, presented himself as a violent man willing to execute others or leave his own behind if it meant their collective survival. But after a tense standoff with Rick Grimes that almost led to a slaughter on all sides, an interrupting grandmother would reveal these men weren't ruthless warlords, but a group fiercely protecting a community of elderly survivors within a nursing home who couldn't defend themselves. When the outbreak hit Atlanta, most of the nursing staff fled, hoping to get back to their own families. Over the next few days, relatives of the elderly residents began showing up to try and save them, but with the streets already turning into war zones, it became safer to stay put, something that quickly turned permanent after the city was hit by Operation Cobalt. The nursing home survived largely due to those family members scavenging supplies and weapons from the surrounding areas of Atlanta, with these runs sometimes turning hostile with others. But they only did what they had to in order to protect the ones they loved. Guillermo was one of the few staff members who stayed behind to help those who couldn't help themselves, and he wasn't even a nurse. He was the home's custodian, a man who simply stepped up and did his best to lead. And although he nearly led his people into a deadly standoff, the two groups ultimately parted on good terms, with Rick even giving up some of the weapons they had almost killed each other over. However, as far as most viewers knew, the Vatos were never seen again after this point. Following the destruction of the CDC, our survivors were desperate to find a new home, so logically most viewers would assume they'd return to the nursing home given they were in their good graces. But they didn't. Or at least, that's what we were led to believe at the time. Even when our group returned to Atlanta in Season 5, there were no signs of Guillermo or the people he protected anywhere in the city. Like so many other factions within The Walking Dead, the Vatos were quietly left behind and abandoned by the narrative despite featuring prominently in their introduction. But as some of you may already know, this isn't actually their whole story. The Season 2 premiere actually has a rather long deleted scene that shows our group returning to the nursing home following the CDC, only to discover the entire faction slaughtered by what seems to have been another hostile group according to Daryl. Everything they had built and fought to protect was wiped out off-screen without ceremony, only to be cut from the narrative altogether. It seems this group was intended to show the viewer not everybody in this world was a threat to our survivors, and friends could be made in the wasteland, even if you start out hostile. So I suspect this scene was cut to keep that aspect of the story, while saving the initial threat of humans with Randall's group for later on in the season. Alternatively, it's possible the scene's exclusion came as a result of Frank Darabont's firing later on in the season's production and a general shift in direction. And although it's never been revealed who was responsible for this attack, I go over a variety of potential options in this video here with many great comments elaborating on the mystery. It was a tragic ending for one of the first selfless factions we ever met, and it only existed through content left on the cutting room floor. A literal example of what it means to be left behind in this universe, not just in the characters' memories, but by the story itself. Now, although it could be argued Randall's group was initially intended to be the culprits behind the nursing home attack, this particular faction wasn't officially introduced until Season 2, Episode 8 of the main show during Rick, Glenn, and Herschel's time at the local bar following Sophia's death. What started out as a tense but rather civil introduction with Dave and Tony entering the bar after hearing our survivors within quickly turned into a deadly shootout as the men had expressed bad intentions with the rest of their group. This was the first instance of a hostile encounter with a human threat turned bloody, and it would quickly grow even more intense once the friends of Dave and Tony discovered the scene and began shooting back. Although, as the noise attracted walkers from all around the area, the men would take off while leaving their injured man Randall behind. Randall at first came off as a genuine kid just trying to make it by like anyone else, but the more he gave away about his group, the more dangerous the threat appeared. They were a faction of about 30 men who were no strangers to committing horrendous acts on the innocent, going as far as to attack the daughters of a man who was forced to watch. A prime example of a group of plunderers surviving by raiding others for supplies early on. Daryl makes it clear if our survivors were to encounter them, they would be dead or worse, with their looming presence growing as the season continued. But following Shane's murder of Randall and the abandoning of the farm, this mysterious group was never seen, mentioned, or referenced again. It's obvious the Randall subplot was used to challenge the morality of Rick and the rest of our survivors early on. His people weren't just a threat, but a catalyst for our group to explore the darker sides of themselves within this world. And although it worked wonders in that aspect, the lack of closure on this group made them feel like they were left behind by the narrative during the shift in showrunners all the same. At this point in the story, this was now the second time a group was introduced without closure, excluding deleted scenes, which was just the beginning of a reoccurring trend we'd see throughout the rest of the franchise. In a way, I think it could be considered beneficial for unseen dangers to exist within the story, as it does make the world feel more lived in. But regardless, it's hard to argue Randall's group wasn't left behind by the narrative. Appearing only in Season 8, Episode 12, while being mentioned by Maggie periodically throughout the rest of the main series, Georgie and her partners are probably one of the strangest examples of a group being left behind in the Walking Dead universe. At the time of their introduction in the story, Georgie, along with her allies, came off as extremely sketchy as she openly approached communities at war with the intentions of trading, mostly unprotected, while dressing like somebody who has been living in sanctuary. According to her, she travels between communities across the wasteland with the desire to create partnerships, often accepting music records for trade of all things in exchange for knowledge. Knowledge on rebuilding the world using the past to help with the present, which often included schematics and blueprints for building windmills, water wheels, and far more. In the case of struggling communities, she's been known to willingly donate large amounts of food from her own collection as she truly believed in what she was doing, with that same food coming from other communities they had peacefully bartered with in the past. By creating trust through trade, Georgie and her partners were looking to reconnect the country and begin the foundations for a new society. In a lawless land, she was trying to open others up to welcoming in a new era across the wasteland despite the lack of structure throughout the country. But this wasn't completely altruistic, however, as she was willing to spread this knowledge and do this work with the hopes of one day being able to bargain with these communities in the future. It's unclear if this group was introduced strictly to coincide with Maggie's departure in the next season, but that's exactly what happened during the 6-year time jump as Maggie kept in contact with Georgie through hidden letters and eventually departed Hilltop in hopes of establishing similar communities throughout the country. And although Maggie would return with Herschel at the end of Season 10, Georgie was never to be seen again. Maggie claims she was with her for a long time, trying and failing to build up fortified settlements, but 2 years preceding her return to Alexandria, Georgie along with the twins took off after hearing rumors of a functioning city out west, and with that, their role in the story was over. Now, as the franchise has gone on, we've learned of many surviving cities throughout the country that could have fit the bill, including the Commonwealth, Omaha, the Campus Colony, and Portland. Although, despite the time we've spent with these super colonies, not a single sign of Georgie has been seen. She hasn't even been mentioned in the present tense within Dead City, which indicates Maggie hasn't been in contact with her at all since their departure out west. Clearly, she wasn't in the Commonwealth given how much time we've spent there. And if she and the twins were in Omaha or the campus colony, well, yeah, odds are they aren't around anymore. Although, Portland is known to still be standing as of the current timeline, so perhaps there is a chance she could be alive, but given their silence in nearly a decade following Maggie's return to the Coalition, I believe it's more than likely she, along with her allies, fell during the CRM gas attacks. But that's what makes Georgie's group such a unique example of a faction being left behind by the narrative. In most cases, smaller groups are either abandoned without a trace or massacred when their time in the story is over. But Georgie's group remained present through occasional mentions despite no signs of ever returning to the series. We know through behind-the-scenes interviews the original intentions for The Walking Dead was to continue on until at least season 15, with Maggie and Negan taking the lead. So I suspect it's possible Georgie was intended to return eventually, possibly as a way to connect the Coalition and Commonwealth to the wider CRM story without bringing Rick back to the main show. But once plans changed, with the main series ending at season 11, the creation of sequel spin-offs, and the transition from the Rick movie trilogy to the Ones Who Live miniseries, it seems there just wasn't any room or purpose in bringing Georgie back given the country had reached what she was trying to build without her anyway. Nowadays, Georgie is remembered for being Maggie's ticket out of the series, and that's about it, as the story, characters, and world continue to evolve while leaving herself and her allies behind, which honestly is kind of sad as her knowledge was essential in rebuilding the Coalition following the war. Whether she died out west or simply faded into silence, Georgie's vision of rebuilding the world is a story that was explored, just without her actually in it. In the Walking Dead universe, not every faction is destined to be the next big group that changes the status quo. Some, like the Vatos, serve a purpose in showing the good left in humanity, and others, like Randall's group, do the exact opposite early on, with both being discarded once that purpose was fulfilled. While factions like Georgie's group were created with a purpose, but were left behind during the ever-shifting direction the franchise was about to take behind the scenes. There are a ton of factions across the franchise that could be considered to have been left behind, so if you'd like to see a part 3 to this type of video, let me know in the comments down below, and be sure to mention what groups you think fit within this general theme. But that is gonna do it for me today, folks. As always, thank you so much for watching.